Oh no, he's not breathing right. Madison Carter dropped her grocery bags on the cracked pavement of the farmer's market parking lot, her heart pounding as she knelt beside the tiny, mud-streaked puppy. His frail body shuddered with each labored breath, his ribs showing through a thin layer of matted fur. The scent of rain lingered in the air, mixing with the market's fading aromas of fresh produce and homemade bread. She could hear distant chatter, vendors packing up their stands, the occasional honk from passing cars. But all her focus was on the shivering ball of fur in front of her. She had only noticed him when she walked past the fish stall, tucked under a wooden crate. At first, she thought he was just sleeping, but then she saw how weakly he lifted his head, his cloudy blue eyes barely open. Something inside her snapped into action. Without hesitation, she scooped him up, feeling how unnaturally light he was in her arms. "He's so cold," she murmured, cradling him against her chest. His small body barely radiated any warmth. She glanced around frantically. "Hey, you okay?" A man's voice interrupted her panic. Madison turned to see an older vendor, Henry, the man who ran the produce stall. His brow furrowed as he wiped his hands on a rag. "I don't know," she admitted, holding the puppy up. "He's in bad shape." Henry peered down at the dog and shook his head. "Poor thing's been around here a few days. Thought someone would take him in." He sighed and looked at Madison. "You gonna help him?" Madison nodded before she could think twice. She was already rushing to her car, carefully holding the puppy as she fumbled for her keys. The nearest vet clinic was only 15 minutes away, but with how unresponsive he was, every second felt like a countdown. As she drove, she kept glancing down at him, watching his tiny chest rise and fall in shallow breaths. His fur was a mix of white and tan, though it was hard to tell under the grime. A few scratches marred his skin, and Madison could only imagine what he had been through. She reached over at a stoplight, gently brushing a finger over his paw. He barely reacted. "Hang in there, little guy," she whispered. The bell above the clinic's door chimed as Madison rushed inside, her voice urgent. "I need help. I found this puppy, and he's not breathing right." A receptionist immediately called for a vet, and within seconds, a technician took him from her arms and hurried to the back. Madison stood frozen, heart hammering, as she watched the doors swing shut. The room around her buzzed with quiet conversations and the occasional bark or meow from other waiting pets. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how fast she had been breathing. A soft voice pulled her attention. "Are you the one who brought in the stray?" She turned to see a middle-aged woman in a white coat. Dr. Evelyn Harper, according to her name tag. The woman's blue eyes were kind but serious. "Yes," Madison said, barely above a whisper. "Is he going to be okay?" Dr. Harper sighed. "He's in critical condition. We're giving him oxygen and fluids now, but there's something concerning." Madison's stomach twisted. "What is it?" "There's a lump in his side. We need to run tests to know for sure, but it could be something dangerous." Madison's breath caught. "Dangerous? Like an infection?" Dr. Harper hesitated before answering. "Possibly, but I don't want to speculate until we know more." She softened her tone. "I know you just found him, but do you want to take responsibility for his care?" Madison barely had to think. "Yes. Just do whatever he needs." Dr. Harper nodded. "All right. We'll keep him overnight and update you as soon as we know anything." Madison exhaled slowly, her shoulders sagging. "Thank you." The night dragged on. Madison tossed and turned in bed, her thoughts consumed by the fragile puppy fighting for his life. Every time she closed her eyes, she pictured his tiny body shivering in her arms, She didn't even know his name yet. By morning, her phone buzzed. A call from the clinic. She snatched it up. Hello? Miss Carter, this is Dr. Harper. We have some news about the puppy. Madison sat up, gripping the phone. Is he okay? He made it through the night, which is a good sign. But we ran tests, and the lump we found. Dr. Harper paused. It's not an infection. It's something worse. Madison felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. What do you mean? What is it? Dr. Harper hesitated. We're looking at a possible foreign object lodged inside him. It could be metal or plastic, something he swallowed. If that's the case, surgery will be necessary. Madison's stomach churned. How soon can it be done? We'll need to perform further imaging to determine exactly what we're dealing with. The sooner we act, the better. Madison swallowed hard, determination settling in her chest. Do it. Whatever it takes, I'll cover the costs. All right? We'll proceed with additional tests now and update you in a few hours. Madison hung up and let out a shaky breath. She had only known this puppy for less than a day, but already she couldn't imagine not fighting for him. Hours later, Dr. Harper called again. We have the results. There's a small metal fragment in his abdomen. We suspect he swallowed something sharp from the trash while scavenging. We need to operate as soon as possible. Madison squeezed the bridge of her nose. Will he survive surgery? There are always risks, especially for such a small, weak puppy. But without it, he won't make it. Madison closed her eyes. Then do it. Later that day, Madison sat in the waiting room, her leg bouncing anxiously as she checked the clock over and over. Minutes felt like hours. The moment Dr. Harper emerged, Madison jumped to her feet. He made it, Dr. Harper said with a small smile. The surgery went well. He's still very weak, but if he recovers over the next few days, he has a good chance. Relief flooded Madison, and she let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Can I see him? Not just yet, Dr. Harper said gently. But soon. He's a fighter, Miss Carter. He's lucky you found him. Madison nodded, her heart swelling. I think I'm the lucky one. Madison sat in the clinic's waiting room, her fingers tightening around her phone. The scent of antiseptic filled the air, mixing with the soft hum of quiet conversations. She had never been one to pray, but in that moment, she sent a silent wish into the universe. The puppy had survived surgery, but the battle wasn't over. He was still weak, and there was no telling how he would recover. Hours passed. Madison barely touched her coffee, her mind running through every possibility. Could he walk again? Would he be okay? What if... Miss Carter? She jumped to her feet as Dr. Harper emerged from the back, her expression calm, but unreadable. Madison searched her face for answers. He's stable, the vet said. We removed the metal fragment, but he's going to need time to recover. He's still very weak. Madison's knees nearly buckled with relief. Can I see him? Dr. Harper hesitated before nodding. For a few minutes. He needs rest. Madison followed her down the quiet hallway, past rooms filled with recovering pets, and the soft hum of medical equipment. The door to the recovery area opened, and there he was. Tiny, wrapped in a soft towel, his little body barely rising and falling with each breath. His fur, still damp from surgery prep, looked even thinner now. His paw twitched slightly as he stirred. Madison's heart squeezed. Hey, little guy, she murmured, kneeling beside his small bed. She gently brushed a finger against his head, feeling the warmth of his fragile body. You scared me. The puppy's eyes fluttered open just slightly, and a weak whimper escaped him. Madison swallowed hard, fighting back tears. She wasn't usually this emotional, but something about him, about his fight, got to her. "He's a strong one," Dr. Harper said softly, "but he's going to need a lot of care." Madison nodded, determination hardening inside her. "I'll do whatever it takes. You'll need to monitor his food intake, make sure he gets enough rest, and be patient. He's not out of the woods yet." Madison reached for her phone, pulling up a note-taking app. "Tell me everything I need to do." Over the next hour, she soaked in every bit of information. Medication schedules, feeding routines, warning signs to watch for. It was a lot, but she refused to feel overwhelmed. This puppy was depending on her, and she wasn't going to let him down. When it was finally time to leave, she reluctantly stepped back. "I'll be back first thing in the morning." Dr. Harper nodded. "Get some rest. He'll need you at your best." Madison drove home in silence, the city lights flashing past her window. She wasn't sure what she had just gotten herself into, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was doing something that truly mattered. The next morning, she was back at the clinic before they even opened. Dr. Harper allowed her to sit with the puppy while he slept, and Madison found herself talking to him, telling him about her day, about how she'd already started thinking of names. By the third day, he was strong enough to lift his head. By the fifth, he wagged his tail for the first time. And by the end of the week, Madison was taking him home. She had transformed her small apartment into a recovery haven. A soft bed, blankets, bowls of fresh water, and a heating pad to keep him warm. She carefully followed Dr. Harper's instructions, feeding him small portions of high-nutrient food and administering his medication right on schedule. The first few nights were rough. He whimpered in his sleep, restless and weak. Madison barely slept, waking at the smallest noise to check on him. But slowly, day by day, he improved. One morning, as Madison sat on the floor beside him, he scooted closer and licked her hand. It was the first real sign of affection, and it nearly brought her to tears. "Well, you're a little fighter, aren't you?" she said, scratching his tiny ears. She had been calling him Puppy all week, but now, as she looked into his recovering eyes, she knew he needed a real name, something strong, something that fit his unbreakable spirit. "Charlie," she murmured, testing the name. The puppy's ears perked slightly at the sound. "Charlie it is." As weeks passed, Charlie grew stronger. His once fragile body began to fill out. His fur became soft and clean. He still had scars, and there were moments when his past fears surfaced. A sudden noise would make him flinch, or he'd hesitate before stepping onto unfamiliar ground. But Madison was patient. She gave him time, love, and reassurance. One evening, as they sat on her small balcony, Charlie curled up beside her, pressing his tiny body against her side. Madison looked out at the city skyline, her hand resting on his back. She had never expected to find a best friend in the middle of a market parking lot. But here he was, proof that sometimes the smallest, most unexpected moments could change everything. Charlie's progress wasn't always linear. There were days he seemed more tired than usual, moments where Madison worried he was regressing. But Dr. Harper reassured her that healing took time. One afternoon, Madison took Charlie for his first short walk outside. He hesitated at the threshold, glancing up at her as if asking for reassurance. She crouched down beside him, giving him a soft scratch behind his ears. "You're safe now, buddy. Let's go see the world." Slowly, he stepped forward. His paws touched the cool concrete, and he sniffed the air, ears twitching as the sounds of the city filled his senses. With every cautious step, his confidence grew. As the days turned into weeks, Charlie's energy returned. He played with toys, wagged his tail more often, and even developed a habit of curling up beside Madison's feet whenever she worked at her desk. One evening, as she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, she felt a soft nudge at her side. Looking down, she saw Charlie gazing up at her, his eyes bright and expectant. Madison grinned. "What is it, buddy?" Charlie jumped onto the couch and nestled against her, letting out a content sigh. Madison chuckled, wrapping an arm around him. "You're a spoiled little guy, you know that?" she murmured. Charlie let out a small, happy huff, as if he understood every word. Madison thought back to the first time she had seen him, frail and scared beneath that crate. It was hard to believe this was the same dog. He had fought so hard, survived against all odds. As she stroked his fur, a realization settled in her chest. She had saved Charlie, but in so many ways, he had saved her too. And for the first time in a long while, everything felt exactly as it should be. Madison woke up to the gentle sound of Charlie shifting at the foot of her bed. It had been nearly a month since she brought him home, and though he was still recovering, he had come a long way from the fragile puppy she had found in the market parking lot. She stretched her arms and yawned, peering down at him. He lifted his head slightly, wagged his tail, and let out a tiny yawn of his own. "Good morning, buddy," she murmured, reaching down to scratch his head. He leaned into her touch, his eyes half closing in contentment. Charlie had grown comfortable in her home, but there were still moments when the weight of his past clung to him. Sudden noises made him flinch, and sometimes he hesitated before stepping into a new room, as if expecting something bad to happen. Madison had learned to be patient, to let him set the pace. Some days he was energetic and eager to play, while others he simply wanted to curl up by her side, as if still regaining his trust in the world. After making a quick breakfast, Madison grabbed Charlie's leash. "What do you say? Want to go for a walk?" His ears perked up, and he scrambled to his feet. He wasn't as hesitant about walks anymore, but Madison always gave him the choice. If he ever pulled away from the leash, she wouldn't force him. But this morning, he seemed eager. His tail wagged excitedly as she clipped the leash onto his collar and led him outside. The early morning air was crisp, and the quiet streets felt peaceful. Charlie sniffed at everything, taking his time to explore. Madison had learned that even small victories, like him confidently stepping forward instead of hesitating, were worth celebrating. They took a slow route through the neighborhood, passing familiar landmarks. As they rounded a corner, Charlie suddenly froze, his body stiffening. Madison followed his gaze and saw a group of kids playing on the sidewalk, a few tossing a ball back and forth. One of the kids let out a loud, excited shout, and Charlie's tail tucked between his legs. His body trembled slightly, and he took a cautious step back. Madison knelt down beside him, rubbing his back gently. "It's okay, Charlie. They're just playing. Nothing's going to hurt you." She didn't force him forward. Instead, she let him process the situation, her touch a constant reassurance. After a few moments, he exhaled and looked back at her, uncertainty still flickering in his eyes. She gave him a soft smile. "Let's go the other way, huh?" Charlie hesitated, then gave a small wag of his tail. Madison turned them onto a different path, one where he didn't have to confront his fears just yet. She knew it would take time, but she also knew that one day he'd realize the world wasn't as scary as it once seemed. Back at home, Madison worked on her laptop, while Charlie curled up on the couch beside her. His body was warm against her leg, a quiet reminder of how far he had come. The thought brought a smile to her lips. She had never expected to find such companionship in a stray puppy, but now she couldn't imagine life without him. The doorbell rang, and Charlie perked up, his ears twitching. He looked to Madison, waiting for her reaction before deciding how to respond. She chuckled. "It's okay, bud. Just the mail." She got up to retrieve the package, returning to see Charlie watching her expectantly. "Just some supplies for you," she teased, opening the box to reveal a new bed and a few chew toys. Charlie sniffed the items, then tentatively picked up a plush toy in his mouth. He gave it a little shake before looking at her, as if asking for permission to play. Madison laughed. "Go ahead, it's yours." For the first time since she'd brought him home, Charlie truly let loose. He pounced on the toy, shaking it vigorously before rolling onto his back, paws flailing in the air. Madison sat on the floor beside him, watching with pure joy as he played. This was a different Charlie than the one she had found. A Charlie who was learning to be happy again. She reached over and scratched his belly, and he immediately stilled, looking up at her with those warm, trusting eyes. "You're home now," she whispered. "And you always will be." That evening, Madison sat on the couch with a book, Charlie curled up beside her, his head resting on her lap. She absent-mindedly stroked his fur, feeling the rhythmic rise and fall of his breathing. It was in moments like these that she realized just how much they had both changed. A knock at the door startled them both. Charlie's head shot up, his ears alert. Madison glanced at the clock. She wasn't expecting anyone. She got up, peering through the peephole before opening the door. It was Dr. Harper. "Dr. Harper? What are you doing here?" The vet smiled, holding a small bag in her hand. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop off some vitamins for Charlie. I also wanted to see how he was doing." Madison stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. Charlie sat cautiously on the floor, watching their guest. Dr. Harper crouched down, offering him a treat from the bag. "Hey there, little fighter. You're looking so much better." Charlie sniffed the treat, then gently took it from her hand, chewing happily. Madison beamed. "He's come a long way, hasn't he?" Dr. Harper nodded. "You've done an incredible job with him. Most people wouldn't have gone through all this effort. He's lucky to have you." Madison shook her head. "I think I'm the lucky one." As they chatted, Dr. Harper observed how Charlie interacted with Madison. "You know," she said after a while, "Charlie might really benefit from some structured training. It could help him build more confidence." Madison considered the suggestion. "I hadn't thought about that. Do you know any good trainers?" Dr. Harper smiled. "Actually, I do. There's a place not too far from here that specializes in helping rescues like Charlie adjust to new lives. I can give you their information." Madison glanced at Charlie, who had now settled comfortably against her leg again. She wanted to do everything she could to help him feel safe and secure. "That sounds perfect. Let's do it." Charlie yawned, letting out a small whimper before nestling deeper into Madison's side. Dr. Harper stood, handing her a card with the trainer's details. "Call them when you're ready. And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." Madison saw her out, then returned to Charlie, rubbing his ears gently. "Looks like we've got another adventure ahead of us, buddy." Charlie didn't move, but his tail wagged slightly in response. Madison smiled. No matter what came next, they were in this together. Madison sat at her kitchen table, staring at the trainer's card in her hand. She traced the edges with her thumb, considering her next move. Charlie was making great progress, but Dr. Harper's suggestion lingered in her mind. Training might give him the confidence he still lacked in certain situations. She glanced over at Charlie, who was chewing contentedly on his new toy. His tail flicked occasionally, showing his happiness, but she knew the scars of his past still affected him. He startled at sudden noises, sometimes hesitated when new people approached. Madison wanted him to feel completely safe, not just in their home, but anywhere they went. Picking up her phone, she dialed the number on the card. A woman answered after 2 rings. "Hello? This is Everwood Canine Training Center. My name's Lisa. How can I help you?" Madison cleared her throat. "Hi, I was referred to you by Dr. Harper. I have a rescue dog, Charlie. He's made great progress, but he's still nervous in certain situations. I was wondering if you have a program that could help?" "Absolutely," Lisa responded warmly. "We specialize in rescues and helping them build confidence. When would you like to bring him in for an evaluation?" After arranging a session for the following afternoon, Madison hung up and took a deep breath. Charlie had already overcome so much. This was just another step toward his new life. The next day, they arrived at the training center, a spacious facility on the outskirts of town. The grounds were well kept, with large fenced areas where dogs of various breeds practiced obedience exercises. Madison led Charlie inside, his leash held firmly, but with enough slack to let him move comfortably. His ears twitched at the sounds of barking and commands being called out. But he stayed close to her, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar environment. A tall woman with short blonde hair approached them, smiling. "You must be Madison, and this handsome guy must be Charlie." Madison nodded. "That's us. He's a little nervous in new places." Lisa crouched down slightly, extending her hand for Charlie to sniff. "That's completely normal. We'll work at his pace. Why don't we start with some basic confidence exercises?" Madison watched as Lisa gently led Charlie through an obstacle course designed for nervous dogs. Low ramps, tunnels, and platforms encouraged him to use his body in new ways. At first, he hesitated at the tunnel's entrance, but with gentle encouragement, he eventually walked through. Lisa beamed. "That's a big step. He's already learning to trust." Madison felt her heart swell with pride. "I just want him to feel safe." "And he will," Lisa assured her. "With patience and the right exercises, he'll gain confidence." Over the next hour, Charlie worked through various exercises, each one bringing small victories. Madison took mental notes, committing the techniques to memory so she could continue training at home. As they left, Lisa handed her a pamphlet with additional exercises. "Practice these at home, and we'll check in next week." On the drive back, Charlie curled up in the passenger seat, tired but content. Madison reached over and scratched his ears. "You did great today, buddy." Charlie sighed happily, resting his head on her lap. Madison smiled. They had come so far, and now they were moving forward together. The next few days, Madison followed Lisa's advice, practicing confidence-building exercises at home. She set up small makeshift obstacles in the living room, guiding Charlie through them with patience. Each time he succeeded, she rewarded him with his favorite treats and praise. Gradually, he seemed to trust his own abilities more. One afternoon, Madison decided to take him to the park. It was a quiet weekday, with only a few joggers and other dog owners walking along the paths. She chose a secluded area where he could explore freely, keeping his leash loose but secure. At first, he stayed close to her, ears twitching at every new sound. But soon, he sniffed the grass, took a few cautious steps forward, and even wagged his tail as he observed a butterfly fluttering past. As they walked, a friendly golden retriever approached. Madison tensed slightly, unsure how Charlie would react. He stiffened, but didn't cower. The retriever's owner smiled. "Is he okay to say hi?" Madison crouched beside Charlie, rubbing his back reassuringly. "He's a rescue, still getting used to other dogs, but we can try." The retriever sniffed Charlie gently, wagging his tail. Charlie stood still, then slowly reached out his nose to return the gesture. After a few moments, he relaxed slightly, his tail giving a hesitant wag. Madison felt a rush of pride. "That's a big step," she murmured. They continued their walk, Charlie looking more at ease than before. By the time they returned home, he curled up on his bed, exhausted but content. Madison sat beside him, stroking his fur. "You're doing so well, Charlie." The next week, they returned to Everwood Canine Training Center. Lisa greeted them warmly. "How's he doing?" Madison grinned. "He made a new friend at the park." Lisa's eyes lit up. "That's wonderful! Let's see how he does with group training today." Charlie was introduced to a small group of dogs, other rescues working through their own fears. At first, he stuck close to Madison, but as the session progressed, he cautiously observed the others, eventually joining in a structured socialization exercise. By the end of the session, he was wagging his tail more freely, even playing with a gentle Labrador. Madison felt overwhelmed with emotion. The Charlie she had found in the market parking lot was no longer just a scared, fragile puppy. He was growing into a confident, happy dog. As they left, Lisa patted Madison's shoulder. "He's coming into his own. You've done an incredible job." Madison looked down at Charlie, who glanced up at her with trusting eyes. "I think we've done it together." That night, as Charlie slept peacefully beside her, Madison reflected on their journey. It hadn't been easy, but every moment had been worth it. And though they still had more progress to make, she knew one thing for sure. Charlie was finally home. Madison woke up earlier than usual, stretching as she reached over to feel Charlie still curled up at the foot of her bed. He had claimed that spot as his own, and Madison found comfort in knowing he felt safe enough to rest peacefully there. The morning light streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the small apartment. She let out a soft sigh, knowing today was another step in Charlie's progress. She glanced down at him. "Ready for another adventure, buddy?" Charlie's ears perked up at the word adventure, and he lifted his head sleepily, yawning before giving his tail a few lazy wags. Madison smiled and got up to start their morning routine. After breakfast, she prepared for their session at Everwood Canine Training Center. Charlie had made huge strides, but there were still challenges ahead. The group classes had helped him socialize, but she wanted to push his progress further. Lisa had recommended one-on-one agility training, which could build Charlie's confidence even more. Madison had signed up for a private session with Lisa to see how Charlie would respond to more structured activities. Arriving at the training center, Madison could feel Charlie's excitement. His tail wagged as he sniffed the air, and he walked beside her with more confidence than he had weeks ago. Lisa greeted them warmly and led them to a more secluded training area where agility equipment was set up. "Agility isn't just about speed," Lisa explained as she adjusted a hurdle. "It's about trust, coordination, and confidence. We're going to start simple and see how Charlie does." Madison knelt down beside him. "You can do this, buddy." Charlie looked up at her, then back at Lisa as she demonstrated a basic jump with another dog. Madison followed Lisa's lead, guiding Charlie toward the first obstacle, a low hurdle. He hesitated at first, sniffing it cautiously. Madison didn't rush him. She encouraged him gently, giving him time to process. Finally, with a small leap, he cleared it. "Yes, good boy," Madison cheered, rewarding him with a treat. Charlie wagged his tail proudly, and Madison could see the spark of confidence in his eyes. They moved on to the next challenge. A small tunnel. This one proved trickier. Charlie stopped at the entrance, lowering his head as he inspected the dark passage. His body tensed slightly, and Madison knew this was a big moment. She crouched beside him. "I know it looks scary, but I promise it's safe." Lisa nodded. "Try leading him through with a treat. Let him take his time." Madison reached inside the tunnel, holding a treat just past the entrance. Charlie hesitated, but then took a step forward. He paused again, uncertain, but when Madison's encouraging voice reached him, he pressed forward and made it through to the other side. Madison clapped. "You did it!" Charlie looked back at the tunnel, then at Madison, as if he realized he had just conquered a fear. His tail wagged, and he bounced slightly in excitement. "He's gaining trust in himself," Lisa observed with a smile. "This is exactly the kind of progress we hope for." The rest of the session was filled with small victories. Charlie completed more jumps, walked across a balance beam, and even attempted the weave poles. By the time they finished, he was panting but visibly happy. As they drove home, Madison reached over to scratch his ears. "I'm so proud of you, Charlie." Charlie leaned into her hand, letting out a satisfied sigh. Madison knew that there would still be challenges ahead, but with every hurdle, both figurative and literal, Charlie was proving to himself that he could overcome them. That evening, Madison decided to take Charlie on a walk through the neighborhood, allowing him to unwind after his training session. The crisp evening air was refreshing, and she enjoyed watching him take in all the new sights and smells. Charlie's confidence continued to build, but he still had moments of uncertainty. They reached the local park, where a few people were out with their dogs. Madison found a quiet spot and sat on a bench while Charlie lay beside her, content but alert. She watched as a couple of children ran across the grass, their laughter filling the air. Charlie's ears twitched at the sound, and Madison rubbed his back reassuringly. After a few minutes, another dog approached. It was a playful-looking border collie, wagging its tail eagerly. Its owner smiled at Madison. "Mind if they say hello?" Madison hesitated, then nodded. "Let's see how he does." The collie sniffed Charlie curiously, bouncing on its paws in excitement. Charlie remained still, his eyes studying the other dog carefully. Then, to Madison's surprise, he took a tentative step forward, sniffing back. The two dogs stood still for a moment before Charlie gave a small, hesitant wag of his tail. "That's wonderful," Madison said softly, feeling a surge of pride. She had seen Charlie overcome so many obstacles, and this was another milestone. After a few minutes, the other owner waved goodbye, and Charlie watched as the collie trotted away. Madison leaned down and scratched his head. "Look at you, making friends." The walk back home felt peaceful, and when they arrived, Charlie curled up on the couch, exhausted but content. Madison sat beside him, scrolling through her phone. She found herself looking at photos she had taken of Charlie over the past few weeks, marveling at his progress. As she set her phone down, she realized something important. Charlie wasn't just a rescue dog anymore. He was family. She had given him a second chance, and in return, he had brought joy and purpose into her life. Over the next week, Madison continued Charlie's training, incorporating new exercises into their routine. She noticed how he hesitated less when encountering new obstacles and responded more confidently to different environments. Each small victory felt like proof that they were on the right path. One morning, as Madison prepared breakfast, her phone rang. It was Lisa. "Hey, I wanted to check in on Charlie's progress. We have an advanced group class starting next month, and I think he's ready for it. Would you be interested?" Madison looked at Charlie, who was watching her expectantly with his bright, trusting eyes. "I think we'd love that." "Great. I'll send you the details." After ending the call, Madison sat down beside Charlie, rubbing his ears. "We're moving up, buddy. Can you believe it?" Charlie wagged his tail, resting his head on her lap. Madison smiled. There was still work to do, but for now, she was simply grateful for how far they had come together. Madison woke up to the soft rhythm of Charlie's breathing beside her. The sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the apartment. She ran her fingers through Charlie's fur and smiled as he stirred, letting out a small yawn before stretching his legs. Today marked another important step in his journey, his first advanced training session at Everwood Canine Training Center. After a quick breakfast, Madison clipped Charlie's leash on and led him outside. He trotted alongside her, his tail wagging slightly as they approached the car. His confidence had grown immensely over the past few weeks, but there were still moments where old fears surfaced. Madison knew today's training would challenge him, but she also knew he was ready. When they arrived at Everwood, Lisa greeted them with her usual warm smile. "You two are right on time. Ready for the next level, Charlie?" Charlie tilted his head at her voice, his ears perking up as if he understood every word. Madison gave him a reassuring pat. "We're ready." Lisa led them toward the larger training yard, where a few other dogs were already waiting with their handlers. Some were excitable, tails wagging furiously, while others stood patiently, awaiting instruction. Madison recognized a few familiar faces from the previous sessions, including the Labrador Charlie had cautiously played with before. "Today's session will focus on controlled distractions and building trust under pressure," Lisa explained. "It's one thing for a dog to follow commands in a quiet space, but out in the real world, distractions are everywhere. This will help Charlie gain even more confidence." Madison nodded, feeling both excited and nervous. She had no doubt that Charlie had the ability, but seeing him in a new, more challenging environment was different from their usual training sessions at home. The first exercise was a recall drill. Lisa had the handlers walk a short distance away from their dogs, then call them back while trainers created mild distractions, bouncing balls, sudden claps, even the sound of a bicycle bell. Madison crouched down and called, "Charlie!" For a moment, Charlie hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the movement of another dog chasing a ball. But then he focused back on Madison and trotted toward her, his tail wagging as she showered him with praise. "That was great," Lisa encouraged. "Now let's add another layer." The next set of drills involved maneuvering through a crowd of moving people and dogs. Charlie had struggled with this in the past. New environments and unpredictable movements had made him nervous, but Madison watched in awe as he followed her lead, keeping pace without panicking. His tail stayed at a relaxed level, his ears flicking toward different sounds, but never completely locking up in fear. Halfway through the session, Lisa introduced an advanced agility course. Madison's heart swelled with pride as Charlie leapt over hurdles, dashed through tunnels, and even attempted a seesaw with only the slightest hesitation. Each successful completion was met with cheers and treats, reinforcing the progress he had made. Toward the end of the training, Lisa introduced one last challenge, a controlled off-leash exercise. Madison had always kept Charlie on a lead outside, but Lisa believed he was ready to try without it in a safe, enclosed environment. Madison swallowed her nerves and unclipped the leash. "You got this, buddy." Charlie looked up at her, waiting for a cue. Madison took a few steps forward, calling his name. He hesitated for only a moment before bounding after her, keeping close by without running off. The moment he reached her, she crouched down and wrapped her arms around him. "You're incredible," she whispered, burying her face in his fur. Lisa clapped her hands. "That was perfect! Madison, you should be so proud!" Madison wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. I am. The session wrapped up with a final round of socialization, and Charlie interacted with the other dogs with a confidence Madison had never seen before. When they left Everwood that day, she knew they had turned a corner. Back at home, Madison gave Charlie a well-earned treat and curled up beside him on the couch. She stroked his fur, thinking about how much had changed since the day she found him trembling in the market parking lot. We've come a long way, haven't we? She murmured. Charlie let out a happy sigh and nuzzled closer. Madison smiled, knowing that their journey together was still unfolding, and with every step, they were growing stronger as a team. Over the next week, Madison worked closely with Charlie, reinforcing what they had learned in training. She set up small obstacle courses in her apartment using pillows, boxes, and even chairs to simulate hurdles and tunnels. Charlie took to the challenges with enthusiasm, showing an eagerness she hadn't seen before. One afternoon, while practicing in the park, a jogger accidentally dropped a tennis ball near them. Charlie's ears perked up, and before Madison could react, he ran toward it. Her heart leapt. This was the first time he had shown interest in a toy that wasn't one of his familiar ones from home. He nudged the ball with his nose and looked at Madison, almost as if asking permission to play. Madison grinned. Go ahead, buddy. Charlie nudged the ball again, this time with more confidence, and began chasing it in small circles. Madison laughed, watching him enjoy himself so freely. It was a moment she would never forget, a symbol of how much he had overcome. Later that evening, Madison sat on her couch with Charlie curled up beside her. She scrolled through her phone, looking at pictures she had taken of him since they first met. From the trembling, malnourished pup to the confident, happy dog he was becoming, the transformation was nothing short of remarkable. Her phone buzzed. A message from Lisa. Charlie's doing amazing. I think he's ready for a bigger challenge. How would you feel about entering a small agility competition, just for fun? Madison stared at the message, then looked at Charlie. He had come so far, but was he ready for something like that? Charlie opened his eyes and looked up at her, as if sensing her thoughts. He gave a small wag of his tail before resting his head on her lap. Madison smiled. What do you think, bud? Ready for another adventure? Charlie's tail wagged a little harder, and Madison took that as her answer. She texted Lisa back. We're in. As she set her phone down, she rubbed Charlie's ears and let herself bask in the moment. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Madison felt a surge of nervous excitement as she loaded Charlie into the car. The day of the agility competition had arrived. She knew this wasn't about winning. It was about showing Charlie how far he'd come and giving him the chance to shine in a new environment. But even knowing that, her palms were sweaty as she gripped the steering wheel, running over the course layout in her mind. Charlie, however, seemed unfazed. He sat in the passenger seat, ears perked and tail wagging, as if he knew something special was about to happen. Madison glanced over at him and smiled. You ready for this, buddy? His answer came in the form of an eager bark, which made Madison laugh. She scratched his ears at a stoplight. I'll take that as a yes. When they arrived at the event grounds, the atmosphere was electric. Tents and banners fluttered in the breeze, and the air was filled with the sound of barking dogs and enthusiastic chatter. Handlers walked their dogs around the staging area, some of them going through warm-up exercises. Madison led Charlie toward the registration table, trying to focus on each step rather than the butterflies in her stomach. A volunteer checked them in and handed her a number to pin on her shirt. First-time competitors? She asked with a friendly smile. Madison nodded. Yeah, we've done some training, but this is our first event. No problem. Just focus on having fun, and take it one obstacle at a time. It's not about perfection. It's about progress. Madison thanked her and took Charlie to the warm-up area. Lisa had sent them off with words of encouragement, reminding Madison to keep it lighthearted. If Charlie senses you're stressed, he'll feel it too. Just keep your voice calm, and he'll do great. They ran through a few practice maneuvers, jumping a small hurdle, weaving between poles, and Madison could see that Charlie was eager. His tail wagged furiously after each successful move, and he looked up at her for reassurance. "Good boy," she praised, rewarding him with a treat. "You're going to rock this." As the event progressed, Madison and Charlie waited their turn, watching other competitors tackle the course. Some dogs were seasoned pros, zipping through the obstacles with precision. Others struggled, hesitating at the tunnel or knocking over a jump bar. Each time, the crowd cheered regardless, offering encouragement to every participant. Finally, it was their turn. Madison took a deep breath and led Charlie to the starting line. The judge signaled, and the timer started. They began with a series of jumps. Charlie cleared the first one easily, his tail wagging as Madison called out the next command. "Over," she said, pointing to the next hurdle. He leapt over it, landing smoothly on the other side. The tunnel came next. Charlie paused at the entrance, his body language showing a moment of doubt. Madison knelt down, her voice calm and reassuring. "You can do it, Charlie. Go through." With a slight nudge, Charlie ducked inside and emerged on the other side, his tail wagging as the crowd clapped. Madison smiled, feeling her own confidence grow. They moved on to the weave poles. This was a trickier obstacle, requiring Charlie to zigzag between each pole. He started slowly, but picked up the rhythm as Madison guided him, her voice steady and encouraging. By the time they reached the final hurdle, Madison was beaming. "Last one, buddy! Over!" Charlie bounded over the hurdle and landed gracefully on the other side. The crowd erupted into cheers, and Madison rushed to his side, kneeling to hug him. "You did it, Charlie! You did it!" As they walked off the course, people came up to congratulate them. "Great run," one man said, giving Charlie a pat. "You can tell he really trusts you." Madison smiled, feeling a swell of pride. "He's worked so hard. I'm just so proud of him." Back at their car, Madison gave Charlie a long drink of water and plenty of belly rubs. "You were amazing," she told him. Charlie licked her hand and rested his head on her lap, clearly content. As they drove home, Madison couldn't stop replaying the run in her mind. Charlie had faced his fears and tackled the challenges head-on. This wasn't just about the agility course. It was about everything they'd overcome together. And this was just the beginning. Charlie's journey was far from over, and Madison couldn't wait to see where it would lead next. As they pulled into the driveway, Madison thought about what the competition meant for Charlie. It wasn't about the ribbons or accolades. It was about the steps he'd taken to conquer his fears. Her phone buzzed with messages from Lisa and a few other handlers who had been at the event. Everyone congratulated her on how well Charlie had done for his first competition. After dinner that evening, Madison and Charlie sat on the couch, flipping through photos from the event. Madison smiled as she scrolled through images of him mid-jump, his tail a blur of wagging energy. "You're a natural," she said softly, rubbing his ears. Charlie looked up at her with his warm, trusting eyes, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Over the next few days, Charlie seemed to carry himself differently. There was a bounce in his step during their walks, a little more eagerness when they practiced agility at home. Madison noticed that he approached obstacles with less hesitation. The competition had given him a confidence boost, and it showed in every interaction. Madison decided it was time to set new goals. The small local competition was just the beginning. she called Lisa to ask about the next steps. "There's a regional event in a few months," Lisa suggested. "It's a bit more advanced, but I think Charlie could handle it." Madison hesitated. "Do you really think we're ready for that?" "Absolutely," Lisa assured her. "It's not just about speed, it's about continuing to build trust and confidence. You two make a great team." Madison thanked her and began preparing for the next phase of training. Each evening after work, she set up more complex courses in their backyard. Charlie tackled the new challenges with growing enthusiasm. Madison worked on her own timing, learning how to guide him through each sequence smoothly. Their bond deepened through the process. Madison could see that Charlie trusted her completely. When he approached an obstacle he didn't understand, he would look back at her, and she'd give him a reassuring word or gesture. That's all it took. His tail would wag, and he'd give it another try. As the weeks passed, their practice sessions became more structured. Madison kept track of their progress in a journal, noting which obstacles Charlie excelled at and which ones he still hesitated on. She also started incorporating short breaks to play with Charlie's favorite toy, a plush rabbit, rewarding him not only with treats, but also with fun. One weekend, Madison took Charlie to a larger training facility to practice on a competition-style course. It was a bustling environment, filled with other handlers and their dogs. At first, Charlie seemed overwhelmed by the noise and activity. Madison knelt down and held his gaze. "You're safe, buddy. We've got this." Charlie took a deep breath, his body relaxing slightly. He followed Madison onto the course, navigating through the new obstacles with caution at first, but soon picking up the pace. By the end of the session, he was weaving through poles and jumping hurdles as if he'd been doing it for years. One of the trainers approached Madison. "He's come a long way," she said. "You've done an amazing job with him." "He's the amazing one," Madison replied, smiling as she watched Charlie chase his plush rabbit across the grass. "I'm just along for the ride." On the drive home, Madison reflected on how much had changed since that day at the market. Charlie was no longer just a scared stray. He was a confident, happy dog with a bright future. Madison knew their journey was far from over, but she felt ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead. It was just after dawn when Madison clipped the leash onto Charlie's collar and stepped out onto the quiet sidewalk. The air was cool, the sun still low on the horizon, and Charlie seemed unusually chipper. His tail wagged enthusiastically as they walked, a noticeable bounce in his step. Madison glanced down at him, smiling. "You're in a good mood this morning, huh?" Charlie gave a soft bark in response, his ears flicking forward. He tugged gently at the leash, eager to keep moving. They walked for a while in comfortable silence, the neighborhood still waking up around them. A jogger passed by with a friendly nod, and a cat darted across a driveway, catching Charlie's attention just long enough for a curious sniff. But for the most part, the world was quiet, peaceful. Madison's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to see a text from Lisa. It was a reminder about the regional competition coming up in 2 weeks. Madison had almost forgotten the date was so close. They'd been training steadily, but now the event loomed large on the calendar. She felt a twinge of nerves. The local competition had been a breeze compared to what they were about to face. The obstacles would be more complex, the environment more intense, and the competitors more experienced. It wasn't just about getting through the course anymore, it was about showing they belonged there. She looked down at Charlie again. "Think we're ready, bud?" Charlie paused, his nose twitching at something on the ground. He looked up at her, his warm brown eyes full of trust. His tail wagged once, then twice. Madison felt her shoulders relax. If Charlie believed in her, she could believe in him. They turned down a side street toward the park. By now the sun was higher, casting a golden glow over the trees. A few other dog owners were out, their pets bounding through the grass or sniffing along the walking trails. Madison found a quiet corner near the open field and unclipped Charlie's leash. He waited patiently, his gaze focused on her. "All right," Madison said. "Let's see what you've got." She pulled a toy out of her bag, Charlie's favorite plush rabbit, and held it up. He perked up immediately, his tail wagging so hard his whole back end wiggled. "Go get it," she called, tossing the toy into the field. Charlie sprinted after it, his ears flying back as he ran. He caught the toy in his mouth and trotted back to her, his chest puffed out with pride. Madison laughed and gave him a treat. "Good boy! That was perfect!" They practiced a few more retrievals, then moved on to agility drills. Madison had brought along a portable hurdle and a set of weave poles, setting them up in a makeshift course. Charlie navigated them with increasing confidence, his movements smooth and precise. Madison's voice stayed calm and steady, her commands clear and encouraging. By the end of their session, Charlie was panting happily, his tongue lolling out as he looked up at her with a goofy grin. "You're ready," she said softly, scratching behind his ears. "We've got this." As they walked back home, Madison thought about how far Charlie had come. He wasn't the same dog she'd found under that crate at the market. He was a confident, capable partner, ready to take on whatever challenge came next. And as much as the upcoming competition made her nervous, it also filled her with a quiet excitement. This wasn't just about winning or proving anything to anyone else. It was about proving to themselves how far they'd come as a team. The next 2 weeks passed quickly. Madison kept their training sessions consistent, but avoided pushing Charlie too hard. She wanted him to stay sharp, but also relaxed and happy. They worked on timing, precision, and endurance, practicing in different locations to get him used to new environments. Each session brought small improvements, and by the time the morning of the competition arrived, Madison felt as ready as she could be. They arrived at the venue early, the grounds already bustling with handlers and their dogs. The air buzzed with energy and anticipation. Madison checked in at the registration table, then found a quiet spot to warm up with Charlie. She went through their usual routine, some light jogging, a few basic commands, and a couple of short agility drills to get him focused. Charlie was alert, responsive, and clearly eager to get started. When their run was finally announced, Madison's heart raced. She walked Charlie to the starting line, giving him a reassuring pat on the head. "You're amazing," she whispered. "No matter what happens out there, you've already won." Charlie looked up at her, his tail wagging. The whistle blew, and they were off. The course was challenging. Taller hurdles, sharper turns, and more distractions than they were used to. But Madison stayed calm, guiding Charlie through each obstacle with steady commands. He hesitated once at a new type of tunnel, but with her encouragement, he pushed through and emerged on the other side, tail wagging triumphantly. The crowd cheered, and Madison felt her confidence grow. They hit their stride midway through the course. Charlie weaved through the poles like a pro, his movements fluid and precise. He cleared the jumps with ease, his ears flopping in the wind. Madison kept her voice steady, calling out each cue just before the next obstacle. By the time they reached the final hurdle, Madison could hardly believe how smoothly everything had gone. "Over!" she called, her voice strong and sure. Charlie soared over the last jump and landed cleanly, his tail wagging furiously. Madison burst into a wide grin and crouched down to hug him as the crowd erupted into applause. "You did it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You absolutely nailed it." As they walked off the course, Madison felt an overwhelming sense of pride, not just in Charlie, but in the partnership they'd built. She thought back to that first day in the market parking lot, when Charlie was just a frightened, starving puppy. Now he was a confident, happy dog who had faced his fears and found his place in the world. The results were posted later that afternoon. Madison didn't care about where they placed. She was just happy they'd finished. But when she saw their names listed near the top of their division, she felt a surge of joy. It wasn't about the ribbons or accolades, but it was nice to see their hard work recognized. As they drove home, Charlie snoozing peacefully in the passenger seat, Madison glanced over at him. "You're something special," she said softly. "You've come so far and I'm so proud of you." Charlie didn't stir, but his tail thumped once against the seat. Madison smiled. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew they could face them together. The sun was already high in the sky as Madison and Charlie walked down the tree-lined path to their favorite training spot. The small park on the edge of town had become a kind of sanctuary for them. Quiet, shaded, and full of room to run through their drills. As they strolled along, Charlie sniffed the air eagerly, his tail wagging in anticipation. Madison smiled down at him, feeling a swell of pride. It hadn't been long since their last competition, and while she knew they still had much to learn, she couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. When they reached the clearing, Madison set down the bag she carried, pulled out a few pieces of equipment, and began setting up a simple course. Charlie sat patiently, watching her every move. Over the months they'd been training, he'd grown to understand the routine. He knew when to sit, when to stay, and when to spring into action. But Madison didn't take his focus for granted. Each session was another chance to strengthen their bond and reinforce the trust they'd built. Once everything was ready, Madison stood back, clapping her hands together. "All right, Charlie," she said brightly. "Let's do this!" Charlie sprang to his feet, his ears perking up as he waited for the first cue. Madison pointed to the first hurdle. "Over!" she called. He bounded over the bar with ease, his tail wagging furiously as he hit the ground on the other side. "Good boy!" Madison cheered, tossing him a small treat before directing him to the next obstacle. They worked through the course together, one command at a time. Weave poles, jumps, tunnels. Each maneuver seemed to flow more smoothly than the last. Madison could see Charlie's confidence growing with each repetition. She could feel it in herself, too. The way she gave the commands felt more natural, more assured. When they finished the run, Madison crouched down to wrap her arms around Charlie. "You're amazing," she said, scratching behind his ears. He nuzzled against her, his tongue lolling out happily. The two of them took a break in the shade, Madison sitting cross-legged in the grass while Charlie stretched out beside her. She pulled out a water bottle and poured some into a collapsible bowl for him. He lapped it up gratefully, then settled back down with a contented sigh. Madison leaned against the base of a tree, her gaze drifting over the field. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. It was moments like this that reminded her why she'd started training Charlie in the first place. It wasn't about ribbons or titles. It was about giving him a sense of security, a sense of purpose. It was about building a life together that was full of trust and joy. As the afternoon wore on, they ran the course a few more times, refining their timing and coordination. Each time, Charlie grew a little more confident, a little more precise. Madison made mental notes about what they needed to work on, tightening his turns, quickening his start off the line. But she also made sure to celebrate the progress they had made. She had learned that it was just as important to acknowledge small victories as it was to aim for big goals. When they finished their final run, Madison packed up the equipment and led Charlie back toward the car. On the way, they passed a group of kids playing frisbee. One of them stopped and pointed. "That dog is so cool. Is he a champion?" Madison laughed, her cheeks flushing. "Not yet," she said, "but he's getting there." Charlie wagged his tail, looking up at her as if to say, "I know I'm cool." Back at home, Madison gave Charlie a well-deserved dinner and settled onto the couch with him curled up beside her. She opened her laptop and began reviewing some of the competition schedules Lisa had sent. There were several regional events coming up, each one presenting new challenges. As she read through the descriptions, she felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. These were bigger stages than what they'd experienced before. The courses would be tougher, the competitors more seasoned. But Madison reminded herself that the journey wasn't about beating anyone else. It was about pushing their own limits, growing together as a team. Charlie shifted beside her, resting his head on her lap. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, smiling at the contented look on his face. "We've got some work ahead of us, buddy," she murmured, "but I know we can do it." Over the next few weeks, Madison and Charlie's training sessions became more focused. They worked on refining their technique, building endurance, and mastering complex sequences. Madison reached out to Lisa for advice, and they arranged a few private coaching sessions to address specific areas that needed improvement. Lisa introduced them to advanced drills, designed to help Charlie navigate sharper turns and respond more quickly to commands. Each session pushed them harder, but Madison was careful not to overwhelm Charlie. She made sure their training was balanced with plenty of play and rest, keeping the experience positive and fun. One day, during a particularly challenging practice run, Charlie hesitated at a new obstacle. A series of elevated platforms arranged in a zigzag pattern. He stopped at the base, his ears flicking back uncertainly. Madison walked up to him and knelt down, her voice soft and reassuring. "It's okay, Charlie. We'll take it slow." She guided him step by step, encouraging him with gentle words and plenty of treats. At first he moved tentatively, his paws testing the stability of each platform. But as Madison stayed by his side, his confidence grew. By the time they reached the last platform, Charlie was wagging his tail again, his hesitation replaced with determination. Madison cheered and hugged him tightly. "You did it! I knew you could!" That moment stayed with Madison as they prepared for their next big competition. It was a reminder that progress wasn't always linear and that patience and trust were the keys to overcoming challenges. Charlie's journey was a testament to the power of perseverance and love. And Madison felt grateful every day for the bond they had built. As they continued to train and grow together, she knew that the best was yet to come. Madison woke up to the gentle sound of Charlie's tail thumping against the edge of her bed. She smiled and reached down to scratch behind his ears. The mornings had become her favorite part of the day, quiet, calm, and filled with Charlie's warm, happy energy. As she pulled on her sneakers, she thought about their routine. They'd spend an hour at the park, practicing the new exercises Lisa had suggested. Madison knew these sessions weren't just about training. They were about strengthening their bond and helping Charlie feel more at ease in the world. Each day brought a little more progress, and she could see it in the way he carried himself. His stride was more confident, his gaze more curious. He was starting to trust not just her, but his own instincts as well. The park was quiet when they arrived. Early morning sunlight filtered through the trees, and the grass was still damp with dew. Madison set up a simple course: a line of weave poles, a small hurdle, and a low platform. She wasn't looking for perfection. She wanted Charlie to feel comfortable and to enjoy the process. "All right, Charlie," she said, her voice light and encouraging. "Let's start with the weave poles." He stepped forward, his ears twitching as he focused on the first pole. Madison gave him a quiet weave, and he began zigzagging through the poles. His movements were slow but deliberate, and Madison praised him softly as he reached the end. She offered a treat and scratched his chin. "Good boy. You're doing great." Next, she directed him toward the hurdle. Charlie had always been a bit hesitant about jumping. Madison kept her tone upbeat. "Over!" Charlie approached the hurdle, hesitating just before the jump. Madison stayed calm, kneeling down and patting the grass on the other side. "It's okay, buddy. You've got this." After a moment's pause, Charlie leapt over the bar, landing smoothly. Madison cheered, clapping her hands. "That's it! Good job, Charlie!" They continued through the course, repeating each obstacle until Charlie's movements became more fluid. Madison knew it would take time, but she could see the improvement. Each session built on the last, and she could tell that Charlie was beginning to enjoy the challenge. After an hour, Madison packed up the equipment and took Charlie on a leisurely walk through the park. The path wound through a grove of trees, and they passed a small pond where ducks floated lazily on the water. Charlie sniffed at everything: tree trunks, leaves, a bench where someone had left a coffee cup. Madison let him explore, giving him the freedom to satisfy his curiosity. A jogger ran past, and Madison noticed how Charlie's ears perked up. Instead of shying away, he stood still, watching. When the jogger waved and kept going, Charlie wagged his tail and resumed sniffing the ground. Madison felt a surge of pride. A few months ago, he would have been too nervous to stand still. Now he was taking it all in stride. They stopped at a clearing where a group of children were playing with a frisbee. Charlie watched them intently, his tail wagging. One of the kids noticed him and waved. "Can we say hi?" Madison nodded. "Sure, just move slowly. He's still getting used to people." The children approached gently, holding out their hands for Charlie to sniff. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, his nose twitching as he investigated. The kids patted his head and said things like, "Good dog," and "He's so soft." Charlie's tail wagged faster, and he even licked one of their hands. Madison smiled, watching as he interacted so calmly. By the time they returned home, Charlie seemed tired, but happy. Madison filled his water bowl and watched as he drank eagerly. "You did so well today," she told him. "I'm so proud of you." Later that evening, Madison sat at her desk, going over some notes from their recent training sessions. She jotted down observations: how Charlie had hesitated at the hurdle but ultimately jumped, how he'd stood calmly when the jogger passed, how he'd greeted the children with curiosity instead of fear. Each small victory felt significant. She also started planning their next steps. Lisa had mentioned an upcoming event that wasn't a competition, but more of a showcase. Handlers would demonstrate their dogs' skills and share their training stories. Madison thought it could be a good opportunity for Charlie to gain more exposure to a public setting without the pressure of scoring points. It would also give them a chance to celebrate how far they'd come. The following weeks were filled with preparation. Madison kept their training sessions light and fun, focusing on building Charlie's confidence. They practiced in different locations, sometimes at the park, other times in her backyard, or even at the training center when it wasn't too crowded. Madison wanted Charlie to feel comfortable no matter where they were. She also worked on refining her own skills as a handler. Lisa had pointed out that Madison's body language and tone of voice made a huge difference. When Madison stayed calm and confident, Charlie followed her lead. She learned to read his signals. When he needed encouragement, when he was ready to push himself, and when he needed a break. As the showcase approached, Madison felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She knew Charlie was ready, but she still worried about how he'd react in front of a larger crowd. Lisa's advice echoed in her mind. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing the bond you've built. That's what people will remember. The day of the showcase, Madison and Charlie arrived early to get settled. The venue was a large outdoor space with a stage and several small courses set up. Other handlers and their dogs were already warming up, and there was a cheerful energy in the air. Madison found a quiet spot to review their routine one last time. Charlie sat beside her, watching the activity around them. When it was their turn, Madison walked Charlie onto the stage. She took a deep breath and smiled at the audience. "This is Charlie," she began, her voice steady. "When I first found him, he was a scared little puppy, struggling just to survive. But with time, patience, and a lot of love, he's grown into the confident, happy dog you see here today." She gave Charlie a cue, and he started the routine they'd practiced so many times. He weaved through poles, jumped over hurdles, and even performed a few simple tricks they'd worked on at home. The audience clapped and cheered, and Madison could see the spark in Charlie's eyes. He seemed to enjoy the attention, his tail wagging steadily as he moved through the routine. When they finished, Madison knelt down and hugged him. The crowd applauded, and Madison felt a surge of pride, not just in Charlie, but in the journey they'd taken together. This wasn't about perfection or competition. It was about celebrating the trust they'd built, the fears they'd overcome, and the joy they'd found along the way. As they left the stage, several people approached to congratulate them. One man said, "You can see how much he trusts you. It's really inspiring." Madison smiled, thanking them. "It's been an incredible journey. He's taught me just as much as I've taught him." Later, as they sat in the shade of a large tree, Madison stroked Charlie's fur. She thought back to that first day she found him, trembling under a crate at the market. It was hard to believe how far they'd come. Every challenge they'd faced had brought them closer, and every step forward had made their bond stronger. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew they'd face it together, one small victory at a time. And that was enough for Madison. It always would be. Madison woke up to the sound of light rain tapping against the window. The soft rhythm made her pause before getting out of bed. She stretched and glanced down at Charlie, who was curled up on his dog bed nearby. His chest rose and fell steadily, and she smiled at how peaceful he looked. After so many months of training, events, and new adventures, they finally had a quiet day to themselves. She went about her usual morning routine, feeding Charlie his breakfast and brewing a cup of coffee. While Charlie happily crunched on his kibble, Madison opened her laptop to check emails. She had received a few messages from other trainers who had attended her recent workshops. They wanted advice on replicating her approach in their own programs. Madison felt a twinge of pride. What had started as a personal journey to help one nervous puppy had blossomed into something much larger. After breakfast, Madison and Charlie ventured outside for a short walk. The rain had tapered off, leaving behind a fresh, earthy scent. Charlie's tail wagged as he explored the damp grass, sniffing every tree and bush along the path. Madison let him set the pace, content to follow wherever his nose led. They wandered through the park, eventually stopping at their favorite spot by the pond. Charlie sat beside her, watching the ducks glide across the water. "This is nice, isn't it?" Madison said softly, reaching down to rub Charlie's ears. He looked up at her with his warm brown eyes, and she felt a wave of gratitude. Charlie had changed her life in ways she hadn't anticipated. What began as a simple act of compassion, rescuing a scared puppy from a market parking lot, had transformed into a journey of mutual trust, growth, and joy. Over the following weeks, Madison noticed something shift in herself. She no longer worried about whether they would win the next competition or master the most complex course. Instead, she focused on the everyday moments with Charlie. The long walks, the quiet evenings, and the little victories that might not earn ribbons, but were priceless nonetheless. One afternoon, as they trained in the backyard, Madison watched Charlie navigate a series of weave poles. He moved smoothly, his body language confident and relaxed. When he reached the end, he turned to her, tail wagging expectantly. Madison clapped her hands and knelt down to hug him. "You're amazing," she said, her voice full of affection. That night, Madison sat at her desk, writing a new article. This one wasn't about training techniques or competition strategies. Instead, it was about the lessons Charlie had taught her, about patience, resilience, and finding joy in the journey. She realized that, in many ways, Charlie had rescued her just as much as she had rescued him. Through his eyes, she had learned to appreciate the present moment and to find beauty in the simplest things. The next morning, Madison received an email from a publisher. They were interested in turning her articles into a book. The idea thrilled and scared her at the same time. But as she looked at Charlie, lying contentedly at her feet, she felt a surge of confidence. This was a chance to share their story with even more people, to inspire others to take that first step in helping a dog in need. The months that followed were filled with writing, speaking engagements, and community events. Madison and Charlie traveled to new places, met people from all walks of life, and heard countless stories of rescue and redemption. Each story reminded her of why she had started this journey, and each person she met reinforced the power of connection between humans and their dogs, and between humans and each other. Through it all, Charlie remained her constant companion. Whether they were at home, on stage, or exploring a new park, he was always by her side, his presence a steady source of comfort and joy. Madison couldn't have asked for a better partner, and she knew that no matter where life took them, they would face it together. As the seasons changed, Madison and Charlie settled into a new rhythm. They still trained, still explored, and still found ways to help others. But now, their days were filled with a sense of contentment. They didn't need to prove anything. They had already found what mattered most: a deep bond, built on trust, love, and a shared journey. In the quiet moments, as Madison sat with Charlie by her side, she reflected on how far they'd come. From the scared, trembling puppy she'd found under that crate to the confident, joyful dog he'd become, Charlie had truly transformed. And in doing so, he had changed her life as well. Madison knew their story wasn't just about a dog's rescue. It was about the power of love to heal, to inspire, and to create a better future. And so, as the rain began to fall again one peaceful evening, Madison and Charlie sat together by the window, watching the world outside. They didn't need words. They had their bond, their journey, and each other. And that was more than enough.